front of everybody. This is Kathy Wagner, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm gonna put to you like this. So actually, it was funny this morning. It's like someone goes, "When it goes, how do you make money writing?" Right, and I actually gave like probably about like a 10-step guide to doing it. Ultimately, what I realized with this whole gig, it's really what it comes down to is choosing what you want and believing in yourself enough to do it. That's literally like it sounds so simple, like Dr. Bill S. Here's a magic pill and to make it better.
I would add the third step of then putting in the work to actually make it happen. And then
but that comes with 1 and 2. Like you have to okay, like right this minute, like when we get out there, I am one of my clients' gig jobs right now is I'm figuring out how to grow a following. So what I'm looking at is big campaigns that have been successful and what they have in common. That's basically what I'm doing for the next today and tomorrow. And it's interesting because I'm not just looking at books. I'm looking at stuff like music and like big campaigns like I'm actually looking at Michael Jackson's Thriller, like that whole album. Yeah. That's one of the most successful albums of all time. And what they did with it to build it was so cool. Like really, really just freaking cool. It was just like they knew it was special and they treated it accordingly and it blew up like big time. Right. And I mean, credit to Jackson for being so talented, but also they were smart about how they did it. And right, there's a lot of work put into that. And there's a lot of work put into it, but you gotta have a focus of where you kind of want to go with this. That's what I've learned. Mm-hmm. Like your book is a memoir. Actually, I'm gonna ask this, like, and I hope this isn't like, if things had worked out differently, and you hadn't gone through what you went through, would you have written fiction instead?
That's a great question. And I can tell you absolutely no. But the bigger question is, would I have written a book at all? Would I have written creative nonfiction? So I'm one of these people who my entire life I've always dreamt of writing a book. It's like, oh, maybe one day I'll write a book, but I have no stories to tell. I've spent my professional career working with words as a writer of some sort, either technical writer, web writer, content strategist, writing trainer, but none of that is creative writing, and it hadn't prepared me for the act of creative writing. So I never considered myself to be a creative writer. So when my son passed, I knew immediately that I had to write this story and that I had to fill in the gaps of my knowledge and learn all I could to become a better creative writer. And ironically enough, I knew at that time that regardless of what had or hadn't happened with my son, if he had continued to live, I would have been just as capable of writing a book, and I would have had just as good of a story to tell and just as many stories to draw from as I had to tell after his death. I just didn't know about it. So his death made me aware of my ability to create whatever I wanted to create, and more aware of the fact that, you know, time, we can't wait for when we can't wait for, oh, when I retire, I might write a book. It's like, no, if I'm feeling drawn to write a book, now is the time to do it. And I think his death really brought that idea home to me.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear? Okay,
I
cool.
Can.
Making sure I have the spirit. My StreamYard sometimes when I hit this. Okay, there it goes. It went back up. Something good. So I sincerely wish you hadn't found out the way you did. I'm gonna say that like on the air. Like it's still like I can't even imagine. And I'm sorry. Like for like as little as that might be worth.
You know, it's what else can you say? I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have, so it's interesting because what you're talking, so my dad's a naturopath. So he was working at a place, at the time he was working at this place called Herbs Plus and Beadsworks, and people would come to him with your son's like problems, like because at the time, it was a new drug and everybody was getting prescribed this thing. And people were getting massively addicted to it, even at the beginning of it, beginning stages of it. And they were like, what to do? So, I mean, it's may not be the most damaging thing ever introduced to the populace, but in terms of medical, but it's up there. Like it has messed up a lot of people's lives.
It absolutely has. And my story is not, is not one of, a painkiller gone bad. My son's drug of choice
No.
was cocaine. And so he, he died from a combination of cocaine, but mostly from the fentanyl. But that was a poisoned drug supply. He was not an opioid addict. He was, as I said, he was addicted to stimulants. So he was a cocaine user predominantly. His kind of group of drugs of choice would be cocaine, crack, meth, those stimulants, as opposed to the downers, the depressants of heroin, fentanyl, and so forth. Not that he didn't use them. I think there was times where he, you get to a point where whatever comes your way, you'll try. But his drug of choices were certainly stimulants, and we all evidence points to the fact that he died from drug poisoning, not from.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, like I said, it's funny. I've had friends who've done cocaine, and they all say the same thing. Cocaine is a wonderful drug. Don't do it. Like literally, it's literally the combination I hear from everybody I know that's done it. It's like it makes you feel amazing.
Don't do it.
Stay as far away from it. You need to stay as far away from it as you can. It is one of the worst ones to get. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and that's great. That's great when it works. Unfortunately, the reality is that people don't stay away from drugs just because they're told to stay away from drugs. And particularly when you're struggling with others, mental health concerns or feelings of depression or anxiety or anything else, then it's really hard to kind of turn away from the ability to feel like you fit in and belong and feel good for a change.
Well, I think the last one's the real key, to feel good, because if they didn't feel good, people wouldn't do them. Like let's be like real here, right? Like that, right? That's the thing. I like, yeah, someone like me who's never done it, right? Who will hear this and go, okay, maybe I shouldn't, because I've seen what it's done to these people. Yeah. That's easy. If you've done it for whatever reason you do, I'm not going to judge people who have or haven't, right? I don't know their story, but once you go down those paths and once you start trying these things, again, part of like to escape maybe those feelings of depression, mental health, maybe you're just bored and looking for a good time. People do stupid things for less reasons than that. And what happens there is, once you've had a taste of it, it's harder to walk away from it, especially if it works. At least it works for a while, right? If you do it long enough, like this is just what I'm gonna shut my phone off because my phone is not important, and I forgot to do that. Oops. But what happens is, at first at least, it works, and then eventually, what happens? And again, depending on how far down the rabbit hole you go, you need those drugs to function, right? Yeah. It's no longer about feeling good. It's about, I need this. And it's the worst thing in the world at that point.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Like I said, from the outside looking in, I think I'm guessing. I didn't fully read your book. I cracked it open. I got it, by the way. I'm going to read it in full somewhere, like when it is on my to read list in full. I knew it and wouldn't get to read it all entirely this week. But I imagine probably the hardest thing about being a parent about this was not that he did it or didn't do it, or what he did or didn't do. It's more the fact that you had to watch him do it. And there's a point in this, and I think one of the hardest things about and I speak not as a parent, just from an imagination perspective. You raise them, you love them, and you have to trust that they're going to figure this out. And if they can't fight this, and you can't fight that battle for them. And it's like, as a parent, you wish you could.
Well, that is, certainly one of the core themes of the book. And, when Tristan has two older sisters, and his oldest sister also struggled with some addiction issues, not as severe as his, but they were certainly present and prominent. And then another sister had no addiction issues whatsoever. But by the time Tristan was only 15 when he first entered active addiction. And as a mom at that point, I was turning over every stone possible, but there's actually no help available for kids, even like minors or adults who are not ready to receive it if they are suffering from addiction or substance use disorder. There is zero help available unless they can say, yes, I'm ready and I want it. And of course, at 15, he's feeling just fine, even though he's been kicked out of 3 schools, is no longer going to school, is no longer doing his Taekwondo, which has been his passion. He's fine. So what I ended up doing, I'm a pretty creative problem solver. I took him to China to study Kung Fu with Shaolin monks. And I stayed with him for about 5 weeks there to get him settled and make sure it was a great spot for him. And he was there for a full year. His entirety of his 16th year, he was studying Shaolin Kung Fu, which was an awesome experience for him. And he was free from drugs, so his brain was able to continue to develop, although it did continue to show some addictive tendencies because addiction is not just about the drug. And he kept sliding back. So he had a number of successes. The martial arts was a huge success for him. He went through culinary school. He worked in some of the best restaurants in Vancouver. But eventually his addiction just took over. And for me, the struggle is in watching him and not knowing early on, not even knowing that recovery was possible, not knowing, that there was hope. And then when Tristan entered recovery, I became aware that I needed to do my work and focus on my life outside of his. And that really I was only responsible for myself. And Tristan had all sorts of resources at that time to be responsible for himself. And he embraced recovery. He found great friends, great community. He gave back to his community. He had a heart of gold. That boy was just so generous with himself and loving. And that's actually one of the things that I feel strongly about in writing this book, was continuing to share his legacy of sharing his story. One of the things that he took tremendous pride in when he was in recovery was being able to help other people by sharing his struggles and meeting them where they are at and listening to them and just sharing your stories without judgment or stigma. And that's one of the main things that I enjoy about, that I really wanted from writing this book, is just the idea that we as parents also suffer from the same stigma. Well, maybe not the same, but we do, we can't share stories of our loved ones in addiction because there's so much stigma and judgment wrapped up with that, particularly as a parent. Like, what did I do wrong, to make that happen? Or what could I have done to prevent it? The reality is nothing. But people don't understand that there's so much judgment attached to it. So I think that sharing our stories is one of the best ways that we can help to battle stigma and, help other people to reach out and say, I need help. Because the reality is we're not alone in this. There are so many people who are challenged with raising kids or having loved ones who are suffering from addiction.
Well, I mean, like I said, it's not always illegal drugs. We do live in a drug culture today. I think one of the big things so I should ask this real question here. How old are you?
I am 58.
You're 58. Okay. So you remember like back in our day, when the clouds didn't just talk, like we're just there and then just talk to me sometimes. I still remember when I was a kid, like the whole war on drugs thing. Right.
Oh.
And I grew up on that. And I've seen where as a culture, where we've gone with a lot of stuff. I remember, and I'm just like, there's a lot more, regardless of, like, I'm not going to just talk about illegal drugs like cocaine. Meth is incredibly easy to get a hold of. I lived in the United States. Whereabouts do you live, if you don't mind my asking?
I'm in the Vancouver area in BC, British Columbia.
I lived in, so you live in BC. I live in Calgary. So Calgary is known for weed is really big out here. but it's got definitely its other share of things. But I remember, like, I lived in Arizona for about, we'll say, for a couple of years. I lived in the Mormon community for one of those years, like for 2 years up there. Drug of choice up there was meth. Like it is incredibly, like, even in places you don't expect it to. It's amazing how much that culture is right under the nose. And like, looking at it from a kid's perspective, they're walking and dealing with this. I think when you, as I get older / wiser, question mark, one of the things I realize is that every day the temptations I faced, the struggles I faced as a kid, are not the same struggles kids today face. They have different temptations. They have a lot more options. They have a lot more ability to make choices beyond the scope of what a parent can do, can realistically watch and monitor. And you can hope for the best. Like no matter, like something you said earlier that definitely rings true is, yeah, you can give the kid all the best upbringing in the world, but right place, right time, right moment, like, you can suddenly have, like, your kid will come in contact with something and they're going to make their choices, right? For what, maybe for peer pressure, friends, bored. I said, I mentioned boredom. That's a big thing. Defying expectations, curiosity, just basic curiosity. What's the big deal about this, right? It's
And
not.
unfortunately, yeah, in this day and age, because it's not just that the drugs are prolific everywhere. And, to that point, Tristan was well into, recovery. He spent the last 14 months of his life in recovery. And he was sober for 12 of them. So it was a slippy, slidey route, but he was predominantly himself for the last, chunk of time. And I remember him telling me, it's like, honestly, he told me that he just thought I was square, that like I didn't like drugs or something, but everybody did drugs. And he was in recovery before he realized that actually not everybody does use hard drugs, that's not what everybody does. It's what a lot of kids do, though, unfortunately. And the challenge is now, I believe firmly that if our drug supply was not poisoned at the moment, Tristan would still be alive and still working towards his recovery, whatever that looked like for him. And so many of our kids and our partners and our parents and our loved ones would be alive if it were not for the toxic drug supply, because it really is Russian roulette at this point. And teenagers particularly have the ability to just feel like, oh, it won't happen to me. They might know about it, but every teenager feels invincible. And that's not the case, right? It just, there's, too much of the street drug supply is poisoned, and it's killing our kids, and they don't get the chance to, be curious and then move on to other things.
No, I again, back in our day, God, I feel old. But I mean, the choices were simpler, right? And now it's, okay, restaurant business. Like, okay, I have buddies that work in the restaurant business. They would tell me stories of what they had access to just in the restaurant, and you're just like, wow, right? Because it's right there, right? And it's,
the restaurant industry is riddled with addiction and drug use, and both alcohol and drugs. And it's one of the reasons that I was talking to a chef about this and saying, like, what is it that attracts, people who are struggling with it? And I think particularly stimulants, because I know Tristan, like, he would cook. He was an amazing cook. Again, he was working the best restaurants. He was looking towards, becoming a chef in fine dining restaurants. And I guess, and he was saying when he was, he would get high and he could just hyper focus and go super fast and never stop. And there's a culture that requires that in a way. But I was asking this chef whether, what is it that attracts them? And he was like, well, it kind of goes both ways. It's also a place where there's a personality that is, that people who struggle with substance use, there's a commonality of personality traits, and there's a sense of belonging. And I think when
Mhm.
people meet each other in a community that works for them, a drug using community that share a common passion around food and common interests, and it all just kind of is circular. And then the expectations in kitchens are often so demanding that again, I guess the drugs help. Unfortunately, Tristan found once he got sober, he was unable to return to the kitchens. He tried a couple of times. He could not stay sober. It was just not an environment that he could be in.
No.
And I know that it absolutely broke his heart to come slowly to the realization through a series of relapses that he had every time he went back to work and went back into the kitchens. And he came to realize that he can't work in the kitchens, certainly not fine dining, and perhaps not professional kitchens whatsoever. Although I don't necessarily agree with that. Over time, he might have been able to find his place, but it was certainly a big challenge for him in his sobriety.
Well, it's super hard. Like that environment again. Because going back to what you say, the expectations, especially of speed and go 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 go, and like it's really easy to get caught up again that motion that go, and someone that I have a buddy right now. He's going through his recovery from alcoholism, and I'm seeing him use his addictive traits in other ways. Like he's working out a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like to the point where it's just like, but again, it's that ability to dive into something.
Yeah.
Right. 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 And if you have that in you, you have to be careful, because once you get into something, you really like, it's just who you are. You get in there, like, and
But
that's a normal.
but those people can be super successful, right? If you challenge it in the right direction, that kind of
Absolutely.
progressiveness
Yeah,
can
absolutely. But that requires no, like I don't this people sometimes will say that addictive traits are bad things. Not necessarily, right?
Mhm.
The qualities some of those people have are actually quite good. It's what drives them to be incredibly successful. It's just about, again, it's what you do with what you have. And again, if you're somebody that can again, it's the environment. There's a lot of things that can impact you, and it's just realizing who you are and who you're not, right? Some people
I,
that walk away, I'm just
yeah.
gonna say people that you want to talk, I can shut up for a minute and you can just say what you're gonna say.
No, go ahead. I just it triggered a thought, but
Yeah,
go.
yeah. Hold on. I promise we'll get there. All I was gonna say is, what I realized is, like again, a lot of, going back to what you say about stigmas. There are good things that come from everything, and recognizing those things and what they are. And like, good traits can have bad consequences, and quote unquote bad traits, I'm gonna use that, can have good consequences too. So it's something I learned. Like, people that I know that have that tendency to be addicted to stuff, they're sometimes the most dedicated people with other tasks. It's for them, it's figuring out what that purpose is and realizing that they have to walk away. And even in saying all that, just like you said earlier, there's ups and downs with that. Like, the guy I'm talking about, he has relapsed here and there. It's not easy.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the people things that don't understand is the vast majority of addiction stems from trauma of some sort, and whether that is something that happened or just something that has been perceived and internalized in a way that is traumatic for the person. That's often at the root of addiction, and certainly anybody who has lived in active addiction for any amount of time has also experienced trauma as part of that lifestyle and living in that way. So a lot of the things, I don't like thinking about them as good or bad traits, but there are people who have a tendency towards more obsessive compulsive behaviors, and that is part of what addiction is obsessive compulsive
Mhm.
behaviors. And it's getting to understanding of where that's coming from. Is there a pain that needs to be addressed that behavior is trying to cover up? And the work that needs to go into figuring out you know, a different way of being within yourself so that you can show up differently in the world around you.
Making peace with yourself. Like, the hardest thing about dealing with trauma is coming to terms that it happened. And I'm making that sound way simpler than that actually is, right? You have to look at yourself in the mirror and kind of, if you've gone through something traumatic, whatever that is, you kind of have to come to the terms that you have to learn to accept what happened to you. And that is a hard thing, right? Depending on what it is, that can be brutal. Like, right? Right? There's a brutality to that. If you can do that, it's possible to make peace with yourself. It's possible. I'm not saying you're going to, it's possible. And then you can reshape that moment or those moments in time into something positive. And again, folks, I realize this, I'm making this sound simple. I did not say that with anything I just said is easy. It's not. There's a brutal honesty you kind of have to face with any traumas you have. Myself, and then the only reason I know this, so when I lived in Arizona, I went through a very hard time in my life, and my teeth were heavily damaged, so I had to go fix my teeth. I part of the reason I held off from fixing my teeth so long, there's a couple reasons. One, it's a terrible moment in my life, and I kind of, at least in the beginning, needed to have that reminder in my head of what I went through. But when I got to a certain point, I was reluctant to fix it. And it took me a long time to get ready to do it. And when I did, I realized why. Because it was everything I went through in that year. I had to kind of make peace. There was a part of me that felt like I let it happen. And it was my fault. And even if it was my fault, I had to accept certain things about that. That was not easy. Like, the night before my surgery, I kind of cried. But once I confronted it, I was able to do something different about it. And again, I'm not putting my trauma into like it was easy for me. No, that took years.
And I'm sure, like, it's not just about if there is one particular incident. Sometimes it isn't one particular incident, but it's just the way you end up talking to yourself. It's the stories you tell yourself, and you can continue to traumatize yourself by the stories you tell yourself. And that's not so easy to start learning a different narrative. And it's one of the go ahead.
No, go. No, you go. I ate your good stuff.
It's one of the reasons. One of the things that I came to terms with while writing this book, one of the reasons why I wrote the book to begin with, the first draft anyway, was to process the trauma that I lived through while living with my son's, addiction, and then recovery and relapses and death. But then what surprised me, originally I had intended to write this book to show that addiction can happen in any family, which I firmly believe, I know to be true.
For sure.
Any family can suffer from addiction. But what I was confronted with as I was writing through this book is that we are not just any family. We are a family that is riddled with generations of addiction. And on Tristan, my kids on both sides have addiction running through generations. And Tristan was not just any kid. He was a kid that was hypersensitive, that was extremely empathic, that was had a hard time making friends or feeling like he fit in. He had trouble regulating his emotions. All of those things show from a very early age are high risk factors for later on struggling with addiction issues. And then he also had undiagnosed depression and ADHD, which I didn't know about, but looking back, the pieces were all there. So through the process of writing the book, I had to confront that, and I had to learn more about and explore Tristan's trauma and how trauma showed up in his life. And what was interesting to me is it took me a long time to process that. Like, I was not going to write about a lot of that because I think I didn't want to share didn't want to share the bad parts of Tristan because I know how sweet he was, and I wanted everybody to know how sweet he was, and I didn't want to share some of the things he went through that show, a different side of him. And in the end, I did, because I feel strongly that one of the things that keeps people in addiction is shame, and not being able to talk about their stories, and not being able to talk about the things that happened to them, and not being able to talk about the things that they did. And well, once I knew about those things about Tristan, then his shame kind of felt like it was my shame. And I was not wanting to say anything to keep him safe, even though, he's safe from anybody's, judgment at this point. And I did share things because I want other parents to know that, there's nothing that their kids do in addiction that is unique. And there's nothing that we have done as parents that are unique. We are all trying our best, and we are all suffering against very impossible odds at times. And it's okay to talk about it. Like, we don't always show up at our best. We are not always who we want to be when we are struggling with some really, really tough issues. So I did share, some of the things that I spent quite a bit of time thinking about, because I really strongly believe in the importance of sharing our stories as a way to break down stigma.
But it's not just breaking down stigma. It's also, we all have a desire at some level to be heard.
Yeah.
If I were to go, I could think of two other reasons you wrote the book off the top of my head that are very personal. The first one you kind of mentioned was Tristan. Here's the thing. I again, you mentioned this. You didn't want Tristan to be stigmatized, but also you, in one very real sense, what this book does accomplish is it gives your son a story to tell, his story. He's doing that for him because he's not here to tell it, and that's a very personal thing. I think that's one of the things that makes it very powerful, right? And in telling that story a little bit, you're also telling a little bit of your own, because what's happening there is, again, as a parent, right? Especially if you really care. Like, I know good parents, I know bad parents. The ones that really are good parents care, and they want to know, like, and maybe one of the hardest things, and this is, I mean, probably part of what you've had to, this is an assumption. If I'm wrong, please, I'm not trying to, but it's almost like you felt you failed. And that's a hard, because you couldn't help them. Mm-hmm. And coming to terms with that, because again, something you say is very true. You can only be helped if you want to. I have my family comes from a Christian background, and one of the things Jesus used to always ask his people before he healed them was, "Do you wish to be healed?" He always would ask that question, and the reason he asked that question is because if you don't wish to be healed, there's nothing he can really do, right? No matter what you took it away, you would find a way to either get it back, or you would find a way back, right? Even knowing that, there's always a little. Probably until you wrote that book, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. There's always a little bit of that one. Could I have done more?
Well, I think there's a number of things you just talked about. One is the amount of who is in this book is reversed. So this book is very firmly my story, and I tried to be very careful in keeping Tristan as a secondary character, because I wanted to be very, for the one thing, I'm aware that as much as I knew my son inside and out, there is so much I did not know about him. And, there's one scene in the book where I talk about, I wish I could see him as he was, and not through this mom filter that we have. Like, I can't remove my mom filter. So I cannot tell Tristan's story, because I did not live Tristan's story. All I can tell is my own story. And so I was very, very committed to staying in my lane while writing this book. Of course, it shares a lot of Tristan's story, because that is the story I'm telling, of my experience with Tristan. But it was very much focused on me. And as far as what was the other thing you were talking about? The reason for writing it. You had a thought there, and I don't know what. Now it's gone.
So let's see if I can refresh your memory. Tristan's story, which is the first thing I said.
Yeah.
You confronting prior to the story, prior to really coming to
the guilt,
dealing
the guilt
with
and
this.
the shame.
Guilt, and that sense of possible failure, because that's
Woulda, shoulda, coulda.
Could I have really done something different?
Yeah.
Because I would, again, knowing what you know, maybe there wasn't a lot she could have done. Again, I haven't read the full story. I will read it. So I will read it. But sorry.
I can tell you, I did everything I possibly could, and it was not enough. And I still struggle with guilt at times.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things. And I think the first, there's a chunk of the book where, I'm really wrestling with those feelings of guilt of why did I not know? Why did I not do something sooner? Why did I do this and not that and the other thing? And I think that's, well, I know, like, I've talked to hundreds of mothers who have lost their kids at this point. And I've been a grief support facilitator, and I have not met a single parent who hasn't felt guilty. Or regret. There's certainly regrets. I have all sorts of regrets to this day. And I think I think that it's okay to feel guilty, to be honest, because it's what we feel. Like there's no feeling that is wrong, but you can't live in it forever. Like, for me, I just had to embrace the fact that I did the absolute best I could. Tristan did the absolute best he could. And I'm not even prepared to say it wasn't good enough. All I can say is it wasn't enough to save him, given our toxic drug supply. And, Tristan was working hard on his recovery. I was working hard on my recovery. I worked hard, to save him. We all did the best we could. So there's no sense living in that state of grief. But it's okay to feel it at times, because it's going to come.
It's human.
Yeah.
Like it's as human as you get. Like, why wouldn't I mean, at least even for a moment or two, feel that way, right? And sometimes there's no good answers. Like you said, you did everything you knew how to do. It's all you can do at the end of the day, right?
No.
All you can do. And Tristan, from what it sounds like, was the same. And again, and he struggled. And sometimes, and much like anybody else, like I cannot stress this enough, folks. No, right? People that are with addiction, are trying to be clean of it. There are good days and there are bad days, and sometimes they fall. No one's undefeated. No one's unbeatable. You know what I mean? Like, no one's unbeatable. Right. And so, like saying he fell short. Lots of people fall short, and that's not a
like everybody.
Yeah.
Like,
well, no. In terms of life, okay. Look. I like, me personally. This is what it comes down to. I have a handful of regrets. I have a million mistakes. I'm good with that. Like that. I will go to the Almighty and go, God, I was a fuck up. I was a fantastic one. I will literally say that to him, right? But that right, because that is who I am. But again, I have no illusions about, like, me being. I can be the best me at the end. All I can be at the end of the day is the best version of myself I know to be. That's exactly it. That's all I can do. Some days that's a better version than others. Some days, right? And that is. We are all on the right. When I say, I'm talking specifically addiction when we're talking about this, right? In terms of being able to go. Again, I've never had an addiction issue like that. So to say, like, I can't say I've struggled with something I've never had. So I can't say that in that particular case. It doesn't make me better. It just means I have other fuck ups. That's fine. And that's another, right? But right, that's another episode. But for the purpose of what we're talking about here, what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter who you are, what drug you're recovering from. There are days, again, I've seen stories of, okay, alcoholism, where all they wanted, they didn't want to drink a bottle, they just wanted a drink.
Mhm.
They just couldn't stop,
Mhm.
right? They couldn't. And they realized it after the fact. But all they wanted was a drink, right? That's human. I want to drink sometimes, right? I mean, that's a human. That's as human as you get, and it's just with some people they can't, and that's just
Mhm.
and for all of us, that's something we all have to kind of like hit. Once we hit that point, we have to recognize it for what it is. And again, I'm making it sound really, 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 really simple. It is really, really, really not. I'll say it like this: there's simple, and then there's easy.
Yeah,
Simple isn't easy. It just isn't.
exactly.
And right. So
Yeah.
what what I'm saying is an accumulation of things I know in my head. Doesn't mean that like you're gonna get it all
Well,
right, right? Right? That doesn't
exactly.
work,
Yeah. It's
right?
like to go
So
back to writing. It's like all we need to write a brilliant bestseller is all of these elements. Does that mean we can sit down and do that? Do it? No.
see, I actually had an epiphany. Okay, like we'll come back to your book a little bit. I actually had an epiphany, and I realized this. So on a lighter topic, I became a Swiftie this year. On a lighter topic, right? And I didn't expect that to happen. Like I listen, I didn't. Have you ever listened to someone on the radio? You think they're really good, but you never actually listened to it. You didn't know who it was,
Mhm.
and that was what happened to me. Like I listened to some of her music, and it was just like, oh my god, she's really good. And I look for some of her catalog. It's like I've heard all this on the radio. I have a problem. This is why. See, I was conditioned to like this stuff, right? Right, right, and that sounds really silly. That sounds really, really silly. But I realized one thing I've realized about great art. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's creative nonfiction, music, comics, whatever the case may be. I think, and this it's there's an authenticity in Taylor Swift's work that's uniquely Taylor, right? And the reason why because she's in one of the most competitive music fields. Like you look
Mhm.
at Ariana Grande, you look at Christina, like some people like Avril Lavigne, Ariana Grande, Nicki Minaj. Like that is one of the most competitive marketplaces for that kind of music. And she's number one. And I realized why. It's because it's not what she sings, it's because she's Taylor Swift singing those things. And
Mhm.
she's been able to tap into that authentic self in a way. And I can use other examples. I can use Eminem for music. I can use Stephen King for writing. I can use J.K. Whatever you think of her, J.K. Rowling for her stuff, right? There's an they have found that authentic core of themselves that they can share to other people. And that's something that I think, again, now finding out what that piece is for each of us, I think is a little different, right? You got to kind of figure out what that spaghetti that sticks on the wall actually is, and that takes time or some luck. I'm not gonna lie, some luck too, right? But I do honestly believe at this point that most of the successful people that are out there, they were true to themselves. And I think one of the big journeys of being an artist, I think the biggest journey of being an artist of any kind is you gotta be you gotta be find a way to be vulnerable enough to share with your audience, not just writing from your head but from your heart.
Mhm.
And when we learn to do that, that's when we truly connect to people.
I would absolutely agree, and the people at the top also have a mountain ton of talent that not everybody has, even if we're being true to ourselves. There's the ability to there's kind of innate, particularly when it comes to art. I think there's an innate talent that people have to, so talking about books, to string words together in a certain ways, to be able to express their thoughts in words in a different way. And I think everybody can learn to be to be a good writer. If but not everybody can learn to be an absolutely great writer, because not only do you need to be true to yourself and vulnerable and find that unique thing, you also actually need to do it in a way that resonates with all of the people. And that's an interesting ingredients that go into it. Plus, there's a huge element, I believe, of luck and support and all sorts of different factors that get people kind of to the top niches of success. For example, there's a ton of talented people that are not that successful, but are just as talented for various reasons.
I see, and that's actually why I would push back on the talent part a little bit. I actually think, in my humble opinion, I think talent's the most overrated part of the journey. I'm not saying talent isn't required, but one of those things in life I've realized, like, and just as I've gotten, again, older / wiser, sometimes the difference. I think the most important lesson we've ever gotten in elementary school was take those attendance. Because honestly, it sounds silly, but one of the things I realized is that a lot of people just don't show up. And I'm talking like for themselves, right? I'm not even talking like for commitments. They just, when it comes right to it, I know people more talented than me that have gotten nowhere near as far as I have. And it's not because I'm right. It's nothing special in terms of, like, I'm not saying I don't have talent, but I think the most important part about what I do is I'm tenacious, right? That tenacity, that relentlessness, that drive to go has created those I show up for myself. I've learned how to do that. And when I realized that's like this game is not so much, if the job is, I realize this, the job is, imagine that your success is a gun and the objective is not to point it at your own foot. Right? Now, you may not know where the target is exactly, but as long as you don't shoot your foot or any other part of you, you're good. Right? And that's what I've learned, is that alone is the big difference with so many people. Then I think talent comes into play. Luck comes into play a little bit more. But I really think one of the most fundamental things we do, and I think in particular Canadians are living proof of this. I think Canadians are some of the most talented people on the planet. You literally, like Vancouver, there are so many stupid talent. Like walking down just downtown Vancouver, right? You can see the characters on the streets just like begging for change. Some of them have amazing stories, and they do something just to get change. Some of them do some incredibly unique, talented, interesting things to get their people's attention. I'm just like, they put a lot of thought. And it sounds like really silly, but they put a lot of thought into this. And I'm just like, just even that part, not alone the musicians, the actors, the Hollywood North stuff, all the other things that are there. So many talented people. But do you know who are the last people to believe it? Them.
Yeah.
And I realize that is I honestly think that's the biggest. Like, I've interviewed legitimately 1,000, like shit, I've interviewed over 1,000 people. And what I've learned, heck, even you, what you said at the very beginning about yourself, right? Absolutely. I'm not a creative writer, right? I with all due respect, I don't fully believe that. I didn't believe that when you told me what you did. When you told me what you did, I was like, nah, I don't think she. All right, you realized it when you wrote the book, but again, it was in you all along.
Well, right? That was the realization, and I knew that immediately, that I was capable of doing all of these things. I just hadn't done them. So, but I hadn't known. Up until that point, I didn't feel like I was capable of it, and then all of a sudden, I knew I was.
Yeah. So, I mean, you might, and I say this with all. I mean, you probably will say hell no, but I mean, you might be one of the most talented writers I've ever had on the show, for all I know. But I'm not say
hell no, but I have no idea. I'll say hell. I have no idea.
Yeah. But I say it like that, right? Just because it's again, the difference is you had that talent before you did it, but
Mhm.
you had to realize it, right? And that is such a, if I could change one thing in the world, just one thing, that's the thing I change.
Mm.
I would teach. I would try to go out of my way and realize that whatever it is that makes you you is truly special, and you can. It's worth something in the world. Because I think if we all had that more, I do think the world would be a better place. Now, maybe I'm on something, not onto something, but that's how I see it. I really do. The moment people realize they can do something, they can discover a talent or a skill or a passion. More importantly, a passion. It's amazing to watch people come alive. It's one of the
Mhm.
most amazing things I've ever seen. It's probably the coolest miracle I see with people back when they have that confidence to do things.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. So so to everybody listening to this, if you don't hear it, you're all worth something. Truly. Like honestly, it doesn't matter who you are, if you are who you are. And the quicker you realize that, the quicker you will discover what you can really do. Anyway, that's my big happy philosophy. So okay, so you mentioned that, are you going, so before we go back to the book and do all the wonderful wrapping up, what, besides discovering your talents and maybe dealing through certain things, um what did this book teach you?
Um, it's a good question. I think, there's a lot of layers to that. Like I wrote this book kind of with two, obviously, in one part for myself and another part very, very explicitly to help others who are maybe going through something similar or have gone through something similar. So it was very much, an exercise of service to others. And I think, so the book taught me, it takes an incredible amount of patience and perseverance to write a book. It takes a tremendous amount, certainly in my case, of connecting and community building and learning, and both in terms of trying to create a story arc that is compelling, and a narrative that is engaging, and words that technically fit. So there's all sorts of the craft stuff that I was learning, but mostly I was learning about myself through it. Um, learning about, my own experiences. That's how I process the world, is to process it through writing. So taking the time to write all of this, one thing I like to talk about is how, that idea of guilt, that most of us mothers have who have raised, teens in addictions or have lost them, is I was hard on myself for sure, but the practice of putting this narrator on the page and then reading her back to me, I could have a whole lot more compassion for the narrator on the page than I had for myself. And they're the same person. So I ended up learning to be much more compassionate with myself. I could see myself much more objectively, um, which was very healing for me. So, the things I learned, are varying from things I learned for myself, things, how I, show up in service of others, the technical craft of writing. Um, so much learning went on through this book.
Okay, I'm not saying you'd write about this again, but would you do another book? You have another one in you?
Yes. I don't know. I certainly, people ask me, will you write another memoir? And I say, I hope not, because, they're all very traumatic. And I don't want any more trauma in my life. But I don't know. I've been on the fence. I think, one of the things, there's a lot of pressure, in a way, I think, especially for us memoirists that come to writing late in life. I had this story to tell. I wasn't burning with ideas to write and tell stories my whole life. It's not part of my lifestyle. It's not part of how I think. So I was clear that I didn't really want to feel pressured to write a second book if it wasn't in me, because what I feel is, like you're saying, you got to find that thing inside of you that really is coming out. I was passionate about writing this book. This book was part of me. I don't know that I will ever have that feeling with another book again, but I am already starting to play around with ideas and, different writing opportunities. And I definitely know that I am not done with writing, for sure.
All right. Would you like a touch piece of advice from a guy that's wanted to write his whole life?
Go right ahead.
No book gives you the same feeling twice.
No.
None of them do. They all feel different. And so if you do decide that you got another book you want to share to the world, again, I'm glad, like, if you decide that you're going to be the world's greatest journaler and write for just you, that's totally fine. Like, whatever you choose to do there's no wrong answer. But if you do decide to share something in the world, then this is my hope for you going forward is I hope the next book gives you more joy to create next time around. That's sincerely what I wish for you. Joy, by the way, in my opinion, is the hardest thing in the world to write.
Mm-hmm.
Right. In my opinion, because so you're in Vancouver, so you got the Hallmark studio up there, and Hallmark is cheesy as fuck. Like, have you ever seen a Hallmark movie? Now, here's the thing: they have embraced their ice cream flavor. They're like, this is who we are, and we don't care because this is who we are, and you gotta respect that. Like whatever you might think about those movies, hey, listen, they make no apologies about the ice cream they make. They do not. Right, and you got to respect that, but it's so cheesy because it's a substitute for joy. Joy is such a precious thing. It's such a truly precious. And by the way, folks, if you love Hallmark movies, I'm not knocking your love of Hallmark movies. They exist for a reason.
They can bring moments of joy, absolutely,
but writing true joy. So one of my favorite creative nonfiction writers is Will Eaton, right? So he writes not just about his Star Trek experiences. He writes about just game nights with his family and friends. And you think that's easy to write. It's not, because, again, there's that real fine line of this is a magical moment. Oh, my God. It's like a love song on the radio. It's like that. Like, if you're in love, you're like, oh, I totally get this. And if you're not, you're like, oh my God, stop. Just stop. Please, just for the love of God, stop.
It's true.
And that's the line. Like, that's the line with joy.
But it's one of the things with grief. And actually, I think probably with a lot of really difficult times. I know, like, coming out of Tristan's addiction when he was in recovery, the joy I felt over the smallest things was astounding. And then after grief, that honestly, when you hit a really kind of acute traumatic grief, like, losing your son, you don't feel joy for a while, and then you don't want to feel joy for a while, and then you start letting it in, and the joy you feel is there's so much more gratitude for that joy. It is, I appreciate it on such a different level because it had been absent for so long, and I can appreciate it more. And I think one of the things I really wanted to do, and I continue to want to do in all of my writing, is to share joy. So even though this book is tragic and hard to read in parts, it's very much is a book of hope and recovery. And, hopefully people will get a sense of joy as they read, if they read to the end. So
what I'll say, and then I think, I mean, unless you want to keep talking, I'm more open to talk to you for a little while longer. But what I will say before we wrap this up is, it's the darkest moments in your life, and you don't always see them right in those moments. Actually, you also can have an incredible amount of good in those moments without actually realizing it. I'm taking this podcast on the road. It's funny because, like, I had made an initial decision to wrap up doing shows on Twitch, because I've done a lot of them on Twitch, like over nearly 600 of them on Twitch, and I've done plus what I did prior to that. So it's like I was looking for, and I'm definitely changing the show up. But one of the things that has come out of doing this, right, is I've seen a lot of people deal with those darker moments, just like what you're talking about here. And and I've heard some other stuff throughout my tenure at the show. Sometimes like great things usually happen in those really dark moments. I mentioned my teeth thing earlier. When I was going through what I was going through in Arizona, there was this family every Sunday would feed me. They took care of me in a time when I needed to be taken care of. And during the whole time it was going on, I never realized how much that was necessary for me. Like you're in so much pain you don't see it. Like you just can't. Like it just right. And then when it's over, I'm just like, I had a lot, and this sounds strange years later. I had a lot of good in that moment, and you don't realize it in those moments because in those moments they hurt like a son of a bitch. They really really do. But those little things really matter. And when I do go on the road, right? When I do go on the road, I have so it's not my first or second stop, but my third or fourth stop is going to be in that town in Arizona for no other
Oh,
reason,
great.
honest to God. Yeah, I'm thankful because I would
Yeah.
not have survived that time in my life if it wasn't for people like them. And
Yeah.
I'm very aware of it. And I'm grateful. I'm beyond belief grateful to those people and others like them there too. It wasn't just them, and there was others. And I realized this, you realize this long after. And so sometimes in those really dark moments, you can look at them years later, more often than not. Like, folks, during it, if I say this to you, you're going to punch me in the face, and I'll completely understand. But like when it's over, yeah, there was some good things in that
Yeah,
moment.
people can be good, and it's the small connections can be deeply meaningful. At those times for sure. I know one of the things I write about is when I was after I lost Tristan, I traveled for a while, and I just wanted to be on my own. I wanted to be by myself. And there was one woman I met in Portugal who just took the time to listen to my story and share a bit of hers and just have a sense of human connection. And just that, basic human connection felt, like, water in a desert to me.
Because you weren't alone. And you
Yeah.
needed that reminder. At that moment in time, you needed it. And it was there. And it was good for you.
Yeah.
Ah,
So,
Miss Kathy.
well,
I
thank you
think
so
we have an
much.
interview here. What do you
I think that was
before
great.
before we wrap up, I got two more questions and then we'll get you to do the plugs. You mentioned you're not sure about doing a book, but you have done other stuff. So I'm gonna ask this, and this will make this a fun one. Okay, yeah, obviously you talk about your creative nonfiction origins, but what's your secret origins of just getting in writing? Was it just a career decision, or were you going a long time ago going, hey, I'll get to writing fiction or not nonfiction books someday?
No, I think growing up in high school, I wasn't a particularly good student. I don't have a brain that really works well academically, but I was always reading, literature, writing, in those areas I shined. Um, so I I considered going into like English literature or whatever, but when I was growing up, and certainly in the family I was growing up, going into creative writing was not a career path. So, and I didn't want to be a teacher, and I didn't anyway. So I just shelved that and did my own thing, which was work in a medical lab for a lot of years, to be honest. And then when I found that to be very soul sucking work, I needed to do something that fulfilled me. And it was always words. It kept coming back to words. And no matter which way it went, words and writing of some sort just was calling to me. At that time, I was a newly single mom with 3 kids. So starting a career as a creative writer really was not an option at that time. So that's when I went into technical writing. And I was surprised by it. I didn't think that it would be interesting, but I really gravitated towards the combination of structure and content and user needs, like, paying attention to what is it the reader needs and wants and how to present that first. So I was very much drawn to that kind of strategic thinking and the structure. And that has been the foundation of my writing for the last 25 years.
Okay. So the second thing is, sounds to me like you've always been a storyteller. Second thing I'm going to mention, and then I'll just say it. My wife will start plugging is. So what did you read in high school? Because come on, it sounds like you loved it. So what was your thing?
I did. Reading was my escape, but in high school I was really into mostly the English literature classics, the Thomas Hardys, Jane Austens, Bronte sisters, all of those ones. Those were my go-tos. Thomas Hess, so it was the classics, I think, and Stephen King. So to balance it out. So those were, I would read everything that Stephen King wrote, and I did read everything that, Hardy and Austen and the Brontes wrote.
Fair enough. Well, I'm going to echo what I said earlier, and that's this. Whatever you choose to do with your writing going forward, whatever it is, may it give you more joy. And I hope the next thing, whatever you choose to go and pursue, it's fun. And once again, I am genuine, for what it's worth, I'm genuinely sorry. So,
thank you.
All right. That's where we get to the lame plugging of business stuff here. But actually, you should mention the book here and where people can find it.
Yes. So the book is, I guess this is a podcast, so they won't see it, but it is called.
They will. It's on camera here, so they will see it. So put it up. Yeah.
Okay. Here with You, a memoir of love, family, and addiction. And it is available in Canada wherever you buy books. So your independent bookstores, the Chapters Indigo, if they don't have it in, they can get it in. And please ask for it at your library or ask for it at your local bookstore, and they can bring it in if they don't already have it.
Okay.
If anybody wants to follow me, I am K Wagner Writes. So KWAGNERWrites.com is my website, or just K Wagner Writes on Instagram and on Facebook.
Okay, so hold on. Let's see if I got this right. KWagnerWrites.com. They gave me an award for this. So hopefully did I do it?
You did it. That's great. Woo-hoo! And it's K Wagner Writes on Instagram and Facebook as well, which I tend to. I do have a blog on my website, but I do not keep it up to date. I do post regularly on social though.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Kate Wagner, and I am thankful she decided to come and tell her story here. Check out her book. I've started it, folks. I didn't get a chance to get very far, but it's a touching book. Hard book some places, but it is a very touching book. And if you want to understand addiction of any kind, really, this is for you. And it's a great story. So definitely check it out. All right, folks. I'm going to be honest with you, because of my deadlines and because of my schedule. I'm probably going to do one more stream next week, and that is it for the month. It's just been it's a crazy time for me. I got a lot of good things happening, so I'm gonna let people in on some of that stuff real soon. If you want to support this podcast and want to see what the travel episodes are going to look like, definitely check out my patreon.com/justjoshingpodcast. $5 a month gets you access to shows you wouldn't normally see. You get to see my travel show before everybody gets to see the travel show, so it's definitely there now. The first episode of the travel show, the audio, drops tonight on on the regular numbering. It's a good one, I promise. And that will do it, ladies and gentlemen, for this episode. Just Josh, I want to thank Kathy for coming on. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. However you chose to do this. Stay inspired out there, and I'll see you guys soon.